Voyage to go, history. Life is a journey, being part of it is everything. Hello, my name is Jessica. Welcome to the second episode of my historical travel podcast, Voyage to go, history, where I take you on the most adventurous journeys from the past that continue to shape our view of the world today. In this true story, 17-year-old German Georg Forster travels around the world with his father, a naturalist, in the 18th century aboard a sailing ship under the command of James Cook. Georg's travel narrative is written in the language of the 18th century. To make it more understandable, I have largely translated it into modern language. His knowledge is that of the late 18th century, so I will place some of his statements in context and provide additional information. What happened in the last episode?
In the last episode, we revisited the beginning of Captain James Cook's second voyage aboard the Resolution, with young Georg Forster as a participant. This monumental journey started on July 13, 1772, when the Resolution and its companion ship, the Adventure, departed Plymouth, leaving England behind. The voyage took the crew past the fertile hills of England, where the Eddystone Lighthouse marked the last familiar sight. The first days at sea were marked by seasickness, even among experienced sailors, but spirits lifted as they approached the coast of Spain. On July 20th, they sighted Cape Ortegal, admiring the mountainous landscape and ripening fields. By July 22nd, they had reached the serene waters near Coruña, where calm seas and a picturesque landscape rejuvenated the crew. The journey then highlighted an act of humanity when they encountered a French ship stranded for 2 months. The Resolution's crew generously provided water to the starving sailors, demonstrating compassion amidst the hardships of the voyage. The episode also touched on geopolitical tensions as Spanish warships confronted the Resolution and Adventure. Despite this brief encounter, the journey continued uninterrupted. Later, Forster noted bioluminescence in the ocean for the first time. This natural phenomenon lit up the seawater at night, a striking sight caused by tiny marine organisms emitting light. Finally, the ships reached the island of Porto Santo on July 28th, admiring its barren beauty and cultivated valleys. Shortly after, they approached Madeira, anchoring near its romantic landscapes of vineyards, valleys, and cypress-studded ridges. This episode showcased not only the geographical discoveries of Cook's expedition, but also the human experiences, natural wonders, and challenges faced along the way.
Wednesday, July 29, 1772, off Madeira, North Atlantic.
In the morning, they were pleasantly surprised by the picturesque view of the city of Funchal. It spread around the bay on gently sloping foothills and had the shape of an amphitheater. Due to this location, all the buildings and houses looked particularly attractive. Most were painted white, many had 2 stories and flat roofs, giving them a resemblance to the simple architecture of the Middle East. Along the shore, various gun batteries and platforms with cannons were visible, and the bay was dominated by an old castle perched on a steep black rock, surrounded by the sea at high tide. Behind the city, another castle towered above. The nearby hills with vineyards, fenced properties, plantations, country houses, and various churches completed the beauty of the landscape. Everything gave the impression of an enchanted island and evoked images of the hanging gardens of Semiramis. At 7 a.m., a boat approached, known as the Health Boat, which had a Captain Dussal aboard. This officer is one of the 2 health inspectors who establish quarantine for ships arriving from the Barbary coast, the Levant, or other regions suspected of harboring plague.
By Barbary, Forster refers to the Barbary states. From the 16th to the early 19th century, these were the Sultanate of Morocco and the Ottoman-regulated regions of Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli.
The health officer inquired about their health status and the country of origin, and he received the requested information. A quarantine was not necessary. Shortly afterward, The two British ships docked and went with their captains to Mr. Loughnan, an English merchant, who by contract supplied all royal ships arriving here with the necessary goods. Forster notes on site that the city does not at all match the impression given by its appearance from the roadstead. The streets are narrow, poorly paved, and dirty. While the houses are made of hewn or baked stones, they are dark inside. Only those belonging to English merchants or other wealthy residents are equipped with glass windows. The rest typically have shutters made of slats, which are fastened at the top with ropes and serve as windows or can be opened when needed. The lower rooms are mostly used as quarters for servants or as shops and storage spaces for goods. As for the churches and monasteries, Forster describes them as simple buildings that reveal no particular knowledge of architecture. Their interiors are tasteless, as the sparse light that filters in from outside only reveals a variety of unnecessary decorations deliberately kept in the Gothic style. The Franciscan monastery is neat and spacious, but its gardens seem to be in poor condition. The nuns from the St. Clara monastery received him politely at the grate of their speaking room, but then sent some older women to offer their handmade flowers. Afterwards, they took a walk with Mr. Loughnan, visiting his country house, which is located a mile from the city on a hill, where they encountered a pleasant gathering of respected English merchants living in Madeira. The captains returned to the ships in the evening, while Georg gladly accepted Mr. Loughnan's polite offer to stay in his house during his short stay on Madeira. The next morning they began exploring the interior regions of the island. They followed a stream uphill and came to a chestnut forest, not far below Mr. Loughnan's estate. The air there was noticeably cooler. Wanting to take the shortest route back, they hired a local guide who led them back to their host after an hour and a half of hiking. Before finally leaving the island, Georg Forster noted down numerous detailed pieces of information. He hoped they would be welcomed by his readers, as they were mostly provided by knowledgeable Englishmen who had lived on Madeira for a long time. He knew that his meticulous descriptions of Madeira would seem redundant to some. However, today they read like a travel guide for Madeira, albeit from the year 1772. Madeira stretches about 58 kilometers in length and 27 kilometers in width. It was first discovered in 1419 and is divided into two districts, named after the cities of Funchal and Machico. Funchal, the only city on the island, is located on the southern coast. In addition to this city, there are 7 other towns or villages. The governor is the head of all civil and military departments on the island. Don João Antonio de Sá Pereira held this position when Forster was on Madeira. He was regarded as a very clever and resourceful man, yet also very reserved and cautious in his actions. The judicial department is overseen by the corregidor, to whom all appeals from lower courts are directed. The king, who can appoint or remove this position at his discretion, tends to appoint individuals from Lisbon for this role. Each court consists of a president. In Funchal, he is called Juiz de Fora, and the Jewish merchants elect their own judge, known as the provider. Tax revenues amount to about £120,000 sterling and are primarily used to pay the royal servants and troops, as well as to maintain public buildings.
£120,000 sterling, when adjusted for today's purchasing power, is equivalent to a value of approximately $22 million.
The taxes consist of the fruit tithe, which belongs to the king as the Grand Master of the Order of Christ, a 10% levy on all incoming goods except food, and finally an 11% tax on all outgoing goods. On the island, there is only one regular troop company of 100 men. However, the militia numbers 3,000 men and is divided into companies, each of which has a captain, a lieutenant, and an ensign. Neither officers nor common soldiers in the militia are paid, but everyone seeks to be included in it, as it confers a certain rank. The militia meets once a year and drills for a month. The number of clergy on the island is about 1,200, many of whom serve as private tutors. Since the expulsion of the Jesuits, there are no public schools here, except for a seminary where 10 students are taught by a priest appointed by the king. Those wishing to be ordained as priests must study at the newly established University of Coimbra in Portugal. There are also about 60 to 70 Franciscans in 4 monasteries, one of which is in Funchal. Around 300 nuns are distributed among 4 convents. The nuns of the Order of Bom Jesus are allowed to leave the convent and marry. In 1768, the total population of the 43 parishes on Madeira was 63,913 people, with more women than men. In that year alone, 5,243 people died, while only 2,198 children were born. This means there were 3,045 more deaths than births. It is highly likely that this was due to an epidemic, as otherwise the island would have been depopulated by now. The climate is excellent, the weather is usually mild, and the heat, even in summer, is very moderate in the higher regions, which is why the more affluent people spend their summers there. In winter, although these mountain regions are covered in snow for several days, in the lower areas, the snow never stays for more than a day or two. However, the accuracy of the birth and death records can be trusted, as Forster had the opportunity to obtain an excerpt from the parish registers through the governor's secretary. The common people have dark skin and are well built, but they have large feet, which is probably due to climbing the steep and rocky paths in the mountains. They have an elongated facial shape, black eyes, and black hair, which naturally falls in curls. However, some people's hair begins to curl in a woolly fashion, a trait that might be due to their mixing with Africans. Overall, they are robustly built, but not unattractively so. The women are not considered beautiful. They lack the rosy complexion and appealing regular features that typically give women grace. Here on Madeira, they are small and stocky, even in the face, but especially in the feet. There is nothing graceful in their manner of dressing and presenting themselves, and in terms of skin color, they are among the darkest brunettes. However, their well-proportioned bodies, beautiful hands, and large, lively eyes somewhat compensate for these shortcomings. The workers wear linen sailor pants, a rough shirt, a large hat, and sometimes a long coat that they drape over their arm during the summer. The women wear skirts and short, tight-fitting bodices, simple clothing that suits some individuals quite well. They also sometimes wear a short, loose coat, but the head remains completely uncovered, and unmarried women tie their hair together on top of their heads. Madeira consisted of a single large mountain that rose from the sea on all sides and converged at the center of the island, where it formed a peak. There was said to be a depression at the top, referred to by the locals as Val. According to their account, this depression was covered with fine evergreen grass. The stones they examined seemed to have been exposed to fire, being porous and black, mostly resembling lava. Based on all these observations, Georg believed it was reasonable to conclude that a fire played a role in the formation of this island, and that the mentioned depression at the mountain peak was formed as a result. In the riverbeds of these streams, there were at some points a variety of larger and smaller stones that carried water down from the higher regions, especially during the winter with heavy rain or when snow began to melt. To promote viticulture, the water was diverted through dams and channels into the vineyards so that each owner could use it at a specific time. Some had access to it year-round, others 3 times a week, some twice, and others only once. In the higher regions, people plant yam roots wherever they can find a small piece of flat land, or create one through manual labor. They surround it with an earthen wall for irrigation, as this plant thrives best in moist soils. The leaves are used as feed for pigs, while the roots, similar to potatoes, are part of their diet. In the higher areas of the land, where viticulture does not thrive, large forests of these plants can be found. Wheat and barley are also grown, particularly in areas where the grapevines no longer flourish due to their age. However, their entire grain harvest is barely enough for a month, so the inhabitants must rely on other food sources, especially North American grains, which are imported in large quantities annually and exchanged for wine. This is partly due to the lack of fertilizer and the laziness of the people. Even if agriculture were brought to the highest level of perfection here, it seems that not enough grain could be produced. Their threshing floors are circular and are set up in a corner of their field where the ground is cleaned and firmly packed. The sheaves are stacked around, and a rectangular board, equipped with sharp flint stones on the bottom, is pulled over it by a pair of oxen. The ox driver stands on top to make the board heavier. This crushes the straw while simultaneously separating the grain from the ears. The largest and most profitable crop on Madeira is wine, which makes the island famous. Wherever the soil, location, and water allow, vineyards are planted. Every vineyard is crisscrossed with paths 3 to 6 feet wide, surrounded by 2-foot-high walls. Along the paths, covered with a 7-foot-high latticework, poles are set at regular intervals, onto which a latticework extends from the roof down to about 2 feet above the ground, covering the entire base of the vineyard. This kept the vines raised, and the workers had space to remove the weeds between the vines. During the harvest, they crawled under the latticework, cut the grapes, and collected them in baskets. Georg observed grapes that weighed over 2.7 kilograms. This method of allowing the soil to ripen in the shade gave Madeira wine its unique body, which was so characteristic of it. It was necessary to use certain areas for bamboo plantations, as the latticework could not be made without bamboo poles. Therefore, if a vineyard lacked this indispensable material due to its location, it could not be properly laid out and often remained fallow. The wine varies in quality and price. The best is made from a type of grape whose vines were brought to Madeira from Crete by order of the Prince of Portugal, Don Heinrich, and planted here. It is called Madeira Malvasia. It is a delicious sweet wine, but it is only produced in limited quantities. The next variety is a dry berry wine, which is exported to London. Approximately 14 million liters are harvested annually. 6 million liters of the best varieties are exported, while the rest is either consumed on the island, distilled into brandy for export to Brazil, or processed into wine vinegar. The vineyards are surrounded by walls or hedges made of pomegranate, myrtle, blackberry, and wild roses. In the gardens, one can find peaches, apricots, quinces, apples, pears, walnuts, chestnuts, and other plants such as bananas, guavas, and pineapples, which are not native to Madeira. Although the sheep and cattle there are small, their meat is still tasty. The horses are also small but sturdily built. They climb the steepest footpaths with great skill, as no other roads exist here. There is no knowledge of wheels or carts in this land. However, in the town, there is a type of sled consisting of 2 boards connected by crossbars, forming a sharp angle at the front. Oxen are harnessed to it to transport wine barrels or other heavy goods. Perhaps because of the lack of grain, there is not a single type of snake here. However, all the houses, vineyards, and gardens are teeming with lizards. Along the coasts of Madeira, there was no shortage of fish in the sea, but since they were still not sufficient for observing the fasting days, the English ships brought salted and dried stockfish from Gothenburg, herrings from New York, and other places in America. They saw few insects, though they might have discovered more had they stayed longer. All the insects they encountered were familiar and did not belong to many different species. At this point, Georg makes a remark that applies to all the islands they touched on this journey. 4-legged animals, amphibians, and insects are not common on islands that are far from the mainland. 4-legged animals are entirely absent unless they were introduced by humans. Fish and birds, however, which can reach these places through air and water without human assistance, are more common and found in various genera. In contrast, large solid lands are rich in all the mentioned animal species, including birds and fish, which, as already mentioned, are widespread everywhere. Africa provided them on this journey with a variety of different species of quadrupeds, amphibians, and insects within a few weeks, whereas in all the other countries they had not made a single new discovery. The next day, they made preparations for their departure from Madeira. With a moved heart, Georg left this charming land and these generous friends. The memories of the friendship and hospitality that made his departure so difficult still echoed in his heart. It remained a true pleasure for him to have experienced British hospitality even outside of England.
This concludes the second part of Georg Forster's journey around the world aboard the HMS Resolution under the command of James Cook. I have linked a map of the location of this episode on Madeira in the show notes. For those who would like to see the locations of the journey around the world in the present day, I recommend my YouTube channel, Voyage to Go. There, I visit the places from Georg Forster's travel narrative and try to uncover traces and connections between today and the past. So that was episode 2 of our journey around the world with Georg Forster, Captain Cook, and the Resolution, on which we will continue our travels together in the coming weeks. I hope we can travel a little further together, because life is a journey. Being part of it is everything.